Welcome to Harmony Talk, a podcast of conversations with dreamers and doers from all walks of life: art, music, industry, social impact, science, invention, and more. This podcast is brought to you by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm your host, Lisa Champeau. Our guest today is Emily Bright, a poet, writer, and journalist currently with Minnesota Public Radio, NPR. Emily is a newscaster and weekend host at NPR, where she has worked since 2017. She also produces 2 weekly arts and books features, Art Hounds and Ask a Bookseller, and also fills in as a host for other shows across NPR News. Her true passion, however, is poetry. And in May 2025, after what sounds like a long process, her book of poetry, Fierce Delight, was published by North Star Press of St. Cloud, Minnesota. It's a collection of poems about early motherhood, quote, the worry and the fierce delight, the 3 a.m. wake-ups and the floor strewn with Cheerios. According to one review, Bright's poems read like snapshots, freeze-framing days that feel both fleeting and unending, even while the rest of the poet's life hums in the background, waiting for its turn to thrive. Emily has worked in public radio for many years, including a post as community features editor at WXPR in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. She has a bachelor's degree from Williams College and a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of Minnesota. Emily is currently working on creative works for younger readers, along with a second poetry collection, This Ground Beneath Our Feet, scheduled for release in April of 2026. Emily joins us from her home in Minnesota. Welcome, Emily.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Your book, Fierce Delight, is just that, a deep dive into all things early motherhood, the sweetness, the pain, the fears, the hilarity, and most of all, the precious sense of wonder that comes with watching another human being entering into our lives and evolving in our world. Tell us first about the process of just writing the book itself. Did you take notes on a daily basis? How did you manage to write a book with all the duties and sleepless nights that come with motherhood? I mean, you didn't say to the baby, hold on, I've got to take notes.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Well, I can tell you that for a number of years, I told people that I was mother by day, writer by nap time. And so I would put my daughter down in her crib. I would watch her eyes get heavy and I'd think, okay. And then I would go make a cup of coffee and sit down and write till she woke up, which was always too soon. She was not a long napper, or even if she were.
I was just going to say, you can't guarantee the nap time.
I know, exactly. And as a writer and as a journalist, I've always had this desire to try to encapsulate and to put into words the intense moments of life. And part of it was driven from this desire of, I might not believe this later. I need to put this into words. And so I would jot down notes of my own from time to time. You can always find time to jot down a sentence or two while you're holding the baby with one arm. And then I would really prize the spaces I could find that were a bit longer where I could revise and where I could slow down enough to create something and to get perspective on it, to figure out whether it would be interesting to anybody other than me.
That's very important. You actually have a poem in your book. It's sort of towards the end. It's called Inspiration Half Wild, which kind of addresses a little bit of what we're talking about, I think, where you talk about inspiration having to pay absolute attention. That's what's demanded. And that's very difficult to do when you're raising a child.
Well, you realize how important your attention is. Our attention is such a gift. What does every child want from their parents? They want their attention. Mom, are you listening? I'm pretty sure you're just stirring the spaghetti. And you're like, no, I can see. So our attention is such a gift. But also, when you have a tiny person who's discovering everything for the first time, then you get to step back and see things through their eyes. And how amazing is it that that leaf is falling? And what does this smell like? And what does this sound like? So I felt that being a poet prepared me very much for parenthood in those discovering the world kinds of ways. The poem that you mentioned, it's called Inspiration Arrives Half Wild. And it says, but only half. Don't let them tell you otherwise. And it's about trying to strike that deal of, hold on, I'd love to write this. You're going to have to wait a few hours. And it references Frank O'Hara, who famously wrote a collection called Lunch Poems, which he wrote on his lunch break at work. At least that's the story as I know it. So it's like, okay, well, if he can do it, maybe I can.
Well, your poems aren't just about you and the baby. How old is the baby now, by the way?
13.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll take us to the process of getting the book published, but
Yes, we'll put a pin in that one. We'll come back to it.
yeah. You bring other members of your family into the poetry as well, your husband and so on and so forth. Do you have a favorite poem from this book? Maybe the title poem?
I do. Well, one that I love to read that is, and I do want to talk about how it's about other things as well, but I tend to read Rocking My Baby to Sleep, but I take requests if you'd rather have me read a different poem.
No, I would like you to read the poem that you choose to read, so please.
Sure. Rocking My Baby to Sleep. After she finally stops squirming, launching out against my ribs in total confidence that I will hold her up. After she lays her head upon my shoulder, then looks up like a prairie dog to see what she might miss. My dinner getting cold, my husband ready with our movie. After she plants her thumb securely in her mouth and spreads the other soft, warm hand against the pulse of my neck. After I run out of songs and stand just rocking quietly, watching her eyelids in their slow blink towards sleep. After all this, and before I lay her down, I remember, finally, to let my body rest. I release my arms, my neck, let her body lower against my body. She stirs and I breathe, recalling what I wish to be pressing into her, not my worry, nor my rush, but something deep and simpler. A full, sweet sleep, a happy waking. In the night lit dim, I hold her. Let these hands be hands of blessing.
That's absolutely beautiful. And you can see the baby and you in the room together. It's a lovely poem, really lovely. Poetry books about motherhood do not seem all that uncommon to me, but apparently, according to the Poetry Foundation, they were largely rejected by publishers until fairly recently. And I read that in a documentary called A Change of World, the poet Sharon Olds recalls the response to submitting motherhood poems in the 1970s. Quote, the editor would say, if you wish to write about your children, may we suggest a ladies' home journal? We are a literary magazine. Did you encounter any kind of resistance regarding your poems, getting them published about motherhood?
Yes, but nobody was kind enough to put it or unkind enough to put it in those words. It simply was rejections. I mean, so the publication process is a nasty combination of subjective and competitive anyway. And I had no luck publishing most of the individual poems of poetry. And I had sent out the collection for a number of years. I had it basically written by the time my daughter was 2.5. So these were all written in that moment. And then I put it on the back shelf and I worked on other things. And I said, I think this collection is worthwhile, but I'm not getting anything. And then a number of years later, I went back and I didn't make many changes and sent it to North Star Press, whom I had encountered because I had a poem in a different anthology they'd written. And they called me back 6 weeks later, which is fast in the publishing world, and said, we love this. This made us cry. And then came down to, we'd like to publish this. It struck a chord with them. And the interesting thing is, while there has definitely been this sense, and it is changing now from the literary world, the gatekeepers that be that, oh, this is a sentimental subject. People who read books in general have responded very well to it. And it's kind of instantly understand, well, of course you'd write about this subject. And I've heard from a number of young parents who feel seen as they're reading it, which is a check for me like, okay, I've hit that universal truth. And I'm told it's become a very popular baby shower gift.
Oh, terrific. Well, what do you think changed between when you first started out trying to sell it and then all of a sudden, literally all of a sudden, this 360-degree turn?
If I knew the magic pixie dust, I would use it on my novels as well. So, I mean, I think part of it over the decades has been more women as editors, some more as, those gatekeepers, broader subjects being seen as this is valuable to talk about. And I think it's just the magic of finding the right person at the right time, which is so much of everything in life.
Hmm. Now, you mentioned that it was often a shower gift, a baby shower gift. Most of the poems in the book are very uplifting, but you do have one or two poems that really look at kind of like the real sort of downs. Like there's a poem about miscarriage.
Absolutely. Miscarriage is incredibly common and it's not deeply talked about. And so as I was putting the collection together, I was very cognizant of wanting to hit all of the notes. The hard, the heavy, the beautiful, I mean, there's a lot of light, there's a lot of hope in this, but there's a poem about longing for a second child. And it's called The Body Wants. And looking at an item in the store and thinking, oh, I hope this won't fit in 6 months, so I won't get it. Or seeing the baby cart in someone else's, grocery cart. And I sent that to a friend who was in the adoption process, and she said, that's it. So I thought that that was an important thing to leave in because it's true to my experience and many people's as well. And if art and poetry can be such a door opener for difficult conversations, really on any topic. So if my poems can be part of that, I'm happy for that.
Now, I'm just curious. Your daughter is 13 now. She's old enough to read these poems. Has she read them? Does she have a reaction?
She's read a few. She very much likes that they are about her. That's what she tells everybody, even though she doesn't remember any of these. So I now have two children, and my younger daughter shows up in a couple of poems in my book that's coming out in the spring. And so every time my older one says, there's a book about me, in my head, I'm thinking, well, it's kind of more about me, frankly, but don't worry, you each have one. So you have to keep things even, right?
Absolutely. So tell us about your upcoming book then, The Ground Beneath Our Feet. So that is also about motherhood?
No. So it's called This Ground Beneath Our Feet, and it's coming out from Holy Cow Press, which is a press out of Duluth, Minnesota. That's a very respected literary press. And the way I've taken to describing it is it's about finding common ground and asking what seeds we're planting for the future. So it starts with poems that are tracing my roots from, my ancestors who crossed the Atlantic to come here, kind of grounding us in where I'm from and the ways in which we form connections with each other, the ways we form community despite differences, and what world we're creating. There's a lot of grounding in the actual physical world. I'm a gardener, so that shows up in my poems as well.
Do you have a lot of unrest or diversity or immigration or things of that nature in where you live in Minnesota? In other words, building community, does it also address those spheres?
It addresses some of that. I worked in refugee resettlement for some years before I got into public radio. And so that flavors my writing and my experience. Actually, so in August 27th, there was a shooting at Annunciation Church and School in Minneapolis, which I was not on the scene, but the entire newsroom was covering and continue to cover where at the end of October and the final child just recently got out of the hospital after nearly 2 months in the hospital just before her 13th birthday. So the collection was complete, but I wrote a poem called Who Buys the Candles for the Vigils about the vigils and the community response in the wake of a school shooting where we swear this will never happen again, and then it happens again. And so I sent it to my editor and I said, can we put this in? And he said, yeah. So yes, there are topics light and heavy.
For some reason, that just gave me chills.
Yeah, it gives me chills.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but you're right. I mean, if you can address it in some way that's helps us move on.
And make decisions that say, is this the world we want to be in? If not, what are we going to change? And lots of people have different ideas and conflicting ideas of what that means. But if I can keep a conversation going in my small part of that, then I'm happy to do so.
So this publication is being printed. The journey this time sounds like it was a lot easier to get it published.
So a portion of that collection was actually my Master's of Fine Arts thesis. And then I went back at the same time, so I think would have been like 2012, and pulled out a bunch of poems and put in a bunch of new ones that I'd written since that I thought was a new collection and kind of reworked it all into a coherent mass. So that has poems that span almost 20 years in the writing, but hopefully feels cohesive when you write it. So, but for whatever my next collection is going to be, I'm going to have to start from ground zero. So I'm slowly working on that.
You have nothing left in the storage bins, huh?
Not much, but I'm open to a challenge.
You mentioned a couple of poets that you do like. Just who are your favorite poets? Who inspired you or inspires you?
So there is a line and the start of Fierce Delight, which is taken from the end of a Grace Paley poem. Paley is largely known for her short stories, but she wrote a poem called For My Daughter when she was an adult. And the last line of that poem, which I quote, is I wanted to explain tiredness is expected. It is even appropriate at the end of the day. And I include that because my mom sent it to me at one point in the midst of this.
Oh, it's perfect. It's a perfect opening for this book.
I thank you. And it's also just a reminder to me about how somebody articulating an experience can be just what you need and the thing that you share and that frees you and that makes you feel seen. And oh, of course, I'm supposed to be tired. It means I gave everything. So I appreciate that. I'm a huge fan of Naomi Shihab Nye, who is a Palestinian American poet living in Texas. And I became a fan of hers in my teens and have just loved every book. She writes a lot about community building. There's a lot of food in her poems. There's a lot of kind of what brings us together. But this is one that she wrote a long time ago called Famous. And it's another one that has a beautifully quotable end line. So the river is famous to the fish. The loud voice is famous to silence, which knew it would inherit the earth before anybody said so. The cat sleeping on the fence is famous to the birds watching him from the birdhouse. The tear is famous, briefly, to the cheek. The idea you carry close to your bosom is famous to your bosom. The boot is famous to the earth, more famous than the dress shoe, which is famous only to floors. The bent photograph is famous to the one who carries it, not at all famous to the one who is pictured. I want to be famous to shuffling men who smile while crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines, famous as the one who smiled back. I want to be famous in the way a pulley is famous, or a buttonhole, not because it did anything spectacular, but because it never forgot what it could do. I always liked her writing.
Interesting. And also, it's very accessible.
I think that's important. I went through a Master's of Fine Arts program and loved that I was, teaching and focused on poetry. I would say accessibility was not a compliment then, and I dispute that because I think poetry should be shared. I think it should be something that we can access. And while a good poem rewards multiple readings, in the same way a good picture book rewards multiple readings, I think that it is not necessarily a sign of having achieved something greater if fewer people understand it. I would say the opposite is true.
True, but it is somewhat of a learned art. In other words, you may start out reading Dr. Seuss when you're little, but then you move on to T.S. Eliot or, whatever as you get older.
And T.S. Eliot is a delight to pick through. So I don't want to misrepresent the range of poetry that I like to read. But if poems can capture an image or moment and work like a snapshot, I think that is one kind of poetry that is valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about some of your other work. You've got a couple of shows, Ask a Bookseller and Art Hounds. They follow a similar concept, asking those in an industry to recommend others in the same field. And I just love that concept. You kind of give the show over to them about something that they enjoy and are involved in. So asking booksellers around the country to recommend a current book, asking artists to be hounds in their communities, searching out great productions to check out, such as spooky storytelling venues for Halloween. The artists really seem to enjoy casting a light on the great things happening in their backyards. Now, are these shows your creations, and how do you find your guest hosts?
These are both things that I inherited that some visionary person had started at NPR. And then they kind of said, hey, could you do this for a little while? I'm too busy. And then they became mine and have done both for the last 5 years and, developed in some ways, but also held to the format. And I think the wonderful thing, if we were limited to, say, the number of books I could read in a year, that's quite a limiting factor, or the number of shows I could see. Or so there's something wonderful about placing it in the hands of somebody who is an expert in the case of booksellers or in the case of artists, or who is just a big fan. So they can say, here's what I love. You might not, but here's why I enjoyed this creation. And here's this person who I think is doing wonderful work. And their enthusiasm and their passion is what makes it interesting. And then we're very fortunate in the state of Minnesota. There's very good support for the arts So that is what allows that art hounds to run as state support.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the booksellers show, they're booksellers from all around the country, are they not?
They are, yes. It's one book, 2 minutes every week. It's called Ask a Bookseller. You can hear the podcast wherever you choose. It's ranges very widely in the subjects. They're all books that are, roughly came out within the last year, but I always say, here's your chance to shine a light on a book that you think deserves more attention. So just this past week, I spoke with a bookseller in Jackson, Mississippi, who recommended an author who was from Mississippi and a book that's also gotten a lot of recognition. But it's wonderful that you hear what's local to someone and what brings them joy.
But how do you find them? I mean, there are a lot of booksellers across the country.
Call them up.
You just sort of close your eyes and pick a spot on the map?
I do have people recommend bookstores, but I will just call independent bookstores and explain what we do. And every so often, somebody will say, no, or I'm too busy. But most of the time, go, oh, that sounds wonderful. We'd love to. So more often, the hesitation is, oh, my manager might want to do instead of me, or oh, we have to find the best person. But it's what they're doing all day long is recommending books to people who want to read. So it's an easy ask.
Well, tell me about the reaction in your family to your book of poetry, the one that was just published this year. Has it been positive? How about your husband?
It's been very supportive, yes. They've seen me writing for my whole life and are delighted to have it out in the world and have been telling people about it. So they've been very supportive.
And certainly some of them are featured. We were going to go back to that, featured in the poetry, your husband, for example.
The collection is broken up into 2 sections, which are titled, And Suddenly I Was a Mother, because it does rather feel that way, and Still I Was Myself. And so the idea of that being that just because you are recentered now on this new human that you are trying to raise, you are still woman, wife, daughter, educated person with a brain who has
You
career
think?
aspirations. And, you're pretty sure it's in there somewhere. And so all of those aspects are still important. I didn't want, sometimes society can kind of diminish specifically mothers, I would say, down to the one who feeds the baby and changes the diapers. And it was very important that this was a 360 story of all the relationships that exists.
And then go into making a child an adult, a baby, a child, an adult, and so on and so forth. Why don't you read one more of your poems, if you don't mind, for us? Maybe from the second half.
I would love to. Here's a poem that I wrote after my husband convinced me to do something rather dangerous, actually. I think we were engaged at the time. And so, of course, I just wanted to do what he was doing. This is called Midnight Kayaking, and it's set in Maine on the ocean, by the way. Midnight Kayaking. How many lights in blackness? Jupiter has set, the Milky Way winds clear as any road. Bioluminescence streams out from my bow, eddies with each paddle dip. I scan for your brief lighted trail, find you almost close enough to touch. We are skimming on the surface of 1,000 interactions. A lobster trapped, a cormorant spreads its feathers wide and drying in the dark. A supernova ruptures millions of years off, and yes, I have always been afraid of sharks and sudden accidents. I would not have come tonight except you shouldered your kayak down the beach and paused at the silent edge of water. Down the bay, the seals roiled, grumbling like stomachs. I keep having to remember how much is alive, how we are alive inside it. I paddle to you and we sit, night blinded, kayaks linked, while the ocean carries us like driftwood down the bay. And I say dangerous because kayaking at night on the ocean is not something that I would.
In the ocean, very dangerous. To
Yes,
me, anyway.
it's not advised.
Well, you handled it very well, and you handled the bit of fear, but also the beauty of it.
Yeah, a sense of how it just accordions our perspective from the tiniest thing to the largest thing and how we fit within the whole world.
Very well put.
And I'll read you a poem that I love to read, especially for audiences that include writers, as they often do, because the thing about being a writer is that invariably someone will come to you with an idea for something that you should write. When people know you are a poet, it can happen anywhere. Friends or neighbors telling you the news and weather sag into a tale whose end your arms anticipate like a box of weights. You should write a poem about this. And they grin in expectation. Say it's Sunday, and the altar candles have been struggling all sermon, one extinguished, the other threatening to snuff the symbolic presence of God, until an altar boy, pressed into action by a nervous deacon, scurries up at offering with the lighter. Afterward, you're standing with your coffee and your pleasant greetings when they circle, hope-eyed. It's a poem about duty, says the deacon. Who's been slacking off behind the scenes, forgetting to trim the wicks? It's not an accusation from his lips, but eager mystery. He knows everything important happens behind the scenes. Someone skips the benediction weekly to make coffee. Someone sharpens pencils in the pews so we can scribble prayers on strips of bulletin, find them folded in our pants on laundry day, and pray. I don't know how it would go, says a woman small and gray, whose name you nearly remember. It would say something about love and how difficult it sometimes is. And the poem would end with a little boy rushing to bring light. Do not tell them no. Do not joke that it takes more than a word in the beginning, nor speak to them of yesterday's fiasco when you drank too much coffee and could do nothing to improve a blank screen. Nod your head. Agree that they have spotted something tremulous and rich tucked into the everyday. They did not have to tell you this. Thank them for the gift.
Very nice. Very, very nice. One of the things we ask almost all of our guests, Emily, is their advice for younger people in their field, and perhaps like yourself, who seek a career in poetry or creative writing. Do you have any advice?
I would say my advice is tie your joy to the things you can control. And this works in the creative field and it works outside of it as well. And the reason I say that is that I personally get great joy from writing. I have no control over what other people will say about my work or who will publish it or when. And if if a person lets whether something is published be their one decider of their worth, that can be really hard. And so be really thoughtful about where you put your joy as well as your time. And you get to decide the meaning of that. So if you want to write and don't let anyone stop you. I can't guarantee who will get to see it. You get to decide that to some extent. And to some extent, that's out of your hands. But you get to decide whether you create something.
I think that's good advice. Find the joy. It's important because it can be a very frustrating field as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's very competitive and rightfully so.
And you don't make a lot of money often.
I have not quit my day job.
Sorry. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Emily. You can find Emily's book, Fierce Delight, on Amazon or on her publisher's website, North Star Press, and several other places as well. I think Thrift Books and
anywhere books are sold. Yeah. Or ask your indie bookseller to order it if they don't have it on the shelf.
There you go. You can find Emily Bright on X. We appreciate your taking the time to talk with us, Emily. Good luck with your books. Seriously.
Thank you so much. It's lovely talking with you today.
Thank you. This podcast has been brought to you by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Lisa Champeau. Be sure to visit HarmonyTalkPodcast.com for more inspiring stories. Talk to you next time.